Welcome and hello, MACC members. I'm Laurel Hansen, MACC's Program and Member Engagement Manager, and welcome to Ask MACC Workforce Edition podcast, brought to you by the Metropolitan Alliance of Connected Communities. We know our network is faced with ongoing and incredible challenges when it comes to workforce. Our workforce is how we provide valuable service to the community, but our workforce challenges can create difficult hurdles for our organizations to operate sustainably. There can be complex and seemingly insurmountable barriers to deal with, and that's why at MACC we decided to launch the Workforce Solutions Initiative, and that includes these bite-sized recorded conversations about workforce issues, along with resources that are available in our Workforce Solutions Hub. Now, during this brief conversation, I'm pleased to be joined by Claudia Waring, Executive Director of MACC member Asian Women United of Minnesota, and along with Diane Seep, a Senior HR Consultant at MACC. Thanks for being with me today, both of you. I really appreciate seeing you. Eager to jump in and hear a little bit more from Claudia to start. Thanks, Claudia, for being with us today. Appreciate seeing you.
Thanks.
When I heard about your work to strengthen compensation at AWUM, and is it okay if I use your acronym, AWUM?
Yes, that's how we usually refer to our organization.
Excellent. Good.
It was too long.
Yeah, I knew we needed to talk about this. It really piqued my interest, and I really wanted you to share your experience and what's happened at AWUM along with our other MACC members. So we're eager to hear from you. Let's start by getting to know you a little. Can you tell us a little bit about AWUM and how you view your role as leader, and maybe a little bit about your background too?
Sure. Thank you, Laurel. AWUM is, as you say, it's a nonprofit organization that's been around for nearly 30 years. And as you can probably tell from our name, we're a culturally specific organization. And our work is really dedicated to providing shelter and advocacy services, to victims and survivors of domestic violence. And we focus very strongly on the local Asian population, which in Minnesota is much larger than some people realize and very diverse. So this organization was actually founded by a group of very young grassroots advocates who wanted to work in the field of domestic violence and realized there was a gap in services to this culturally specific community. So the organization kind of got its roots in the early 90s, became an official organization recognized by the IRS in 1996, and opened House of Peace Shelter in 2001. So all of this happened before I had even heard of AWUM. My history in nonprofits here in the Twin Cities goes back almost 30 years. I was actually hired for a frontline direct service job in the fall of 1994, and worked for a local organization for 15 years, and then did a little bit of fundraising work for another organization for not even a year. And then I joined AWUM in 2010 as the executive director.
Is there anything specific that you see as in your role as the leader of the organization? Like, what kind of leader did you think of yourself as?
Well, I think that I really benefited from kind of a longer history in nonprofits prior to arriving here. I don't know if this is accurate. I did 6 or 7 roles in nonprofit work,
Wow.
A couple of which were direct service. I also worked in human resources and in fundraising. I'm a neighborhood center director. So I did a lot of different jobs that I think prepared me for the job that I'm in currently. And what I like about having that history is I try, I don't know if everybody would agree with me, but I try to retain some of the perspective that came from each of those roles. So I do know what it's like to be like the only staff in a community center during a crisis on a Tuesday night, for example.
Right.
On that. Been a long time, but I've done that kind of work. And so I try to dig deep. So I have some empathy for my current frontline staff. And I really think those direct service roles very early in my career laid a pretty decent foundation because I would say my priority as a leader of an organization is to really champion the front lines. I mean, the frontline staff are where the work gets done. They're the heart of the organization.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that does really show in how you lead and what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to throw an analogy out here. In nonprofits, we wear a lot of hats and we walk in the shoes of the people that we work with. So if we've been there, that I think that is a really helpful experience and one we can all relate to. Thanks for letting us get to know you a little bit. So Diane and I chatted before our conversation today, and she really expressed to me how your commitment to your team really comes through. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. And specifically, we want to talk about pay equity and the ability for organizations to remain competitive regarding salaries and the full packages. That has just become so critically challenging for organizations, and especially when we look at other sectors. And I think sometimes we feel a little undervalued in regards to what we're able to do. And it's hard. And, that's definitely one of the things that we're hearing from and talking to MACC members about. We hear that nonprofits, they want to improve pay, but sometimes they definitely feel stuck in a position that makes that difficult. I'll always fall back on the between a rock and a hard place saying. And I'm sure you've been there, right? You know what this nonprofit world is like. You've been in this, your history, you've been in this field for a long time. So at AWUM, how do you approach that? And what was an indicator to you that you needed to make some changes at AWUM? Because that's what I heard, that you've been on a journey, and we'd love to hear a little bit, let's start with the first part. Like, what were the indicators to you? How did it feel to be in some of those positions when it comes to pay?
Well, when I arrived at AWUM, I wish I had this data in front of me, but the salary for a shelter advocate was extraordinarily low. I mean, for the work that is expected for that professional role, for a person who is any day apt to need to problem solve a crisis, it was shocking.
Almost like a volunteer, right? Like,
yes,
not
exactly.
a professional role. Yeah.
Right. It was just appalling. And so this goes back 13 years. And at that time, we were kind of continually in a little bit of a financial crisis. Our finances were not stable when I took the job, and it took a good 2-3 years to stabilize. But when I saw that, I thought, I can't expect people to do this kind of a job for that level of wage. And so I think that actually sort of that initiated my prioritizing sort of the lowest paid / frontline worker pay rate as the one to focus on the most. And so one of the first things I did is I worked not even so much with our HR person at the time, but with my finance person at the time, whose name was Mui Lee, and she's beloved throughout MACC, I believe, but she was a good friend and a wonderful finance consultant for us. And I said, we have to pay people more. I need to figure this out. We don't even have to look at sort of the manager and leadership salaries right now. I really need to raise these rates. And so we were able to do that, which sadly, when you're talking about such low pay, a percentage of that is still a very tiny amount. So incrementally, we just prioritized raising those rates more quickly than other rates. The other thing I did is I got rid of some inequities in our health insurance. At that time, employees were being charged different premium levels depending on, their age bracket. I don't even know what that's called. I would have to ask Diane what the correct term is. But essentially, in this band of age, a person was paying a lot of money per month for healthcare. And then, if you're under 25, it's very little. But instead, I was determined to make everybody pay not very much for their health insurance and to offer as good a health plan as we possibly could. And I've made that a priority every year that I've been here. And thankfully, because funding has stabilized, and in fact, we've been able to get some grants and persuade some of our contractors that this is essential. We've been able to continue providing that more equitable healthcare at a pretty low rate, or a little low cost to the employers.
Yeah, it sounds like those prioritizations where you just said this is a non-negotiable, like this is what the organization will do, has been so critical into your developing strategies that really support that point of view and that direction that you were moving AWUM into. And it's impressive that you were able to tune in to the workforce and to really acknowledge that you could make a difference for people inside your organization. And you've shared with us a few changes you ultimately have made in pay and bonuses. But I'd like to maybe just hear like a little bit more. You've talked about pay and benefits. Is there any approach that you've taken to bonuses? Is that a strategy within AWUM?
Well, and I have to acknowledge and thank Diane for her standing with us throughout the entire COVID crisis, which I hesitate to say it's in the past, but the height of it, in really trying to figure out the most equitable and also B, the most generous way we could compensate people who were on the front lines every single day for that health crisis. I mean, I mentioned we provide shelter. So we have advocates in, a not very large building doing face-to-face work, contact, crisis management every day. It doesn't matter what's happening in the world or outside. That is what we do. So I worked really closely with Diane to figure out ways to offer what we deemed, and I think this was Diane's actual her verbiage, appreciation pay. So a lot of people sort of out in the world consider that or would call that hazard pay. But essentially it was appreciating the risk that frontline staff took every day in coming in with a ton of unknowns, with a house full of people who needed a safe place. I mean, this is an emergency shelter. And if there are people coughing and sneezing and having fevers and all that stuff, we continue to provide services. And so it was either 23 months or 2 solid years, we were able to offer appreciation pay to people who were on the front lines. And the way I did that is I applied for every COVID relief dollar available to me.
Sure.
So anytime there was an RFP, I applied for it. And if it were unrestricted, like ask for what you need and what you want, I would ask for appreciation pay for staff. If there were any other strings attached, like, I was able to get some new air filters and other sort of PPE related items for the shelter. But I really focused and have continued to focus on applying for funding to make sure that frontline staff are compensated adequately, if not generously, at least relative to the local market. And that's been my focus.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Your passionate advocacy for your team really comes through in what you're sharing with us today. And I just want to wrap up this question with: have you seen impacts? Like, I know you're investing in your workforce because it's equitable to do so, but have you seen any impacts or any outcomes from this very strategic focus on your frontline?
Well, a couple of things. I've mentioned raising funds, and that's a huge part of my job. We don't have a development department at AWUM, so I write the grants and manage the contracts and such. And I've
Wearing
been
more hats.
yeah, like all of us. I've been really transparent with every single funder that this is my focus.
Mhm.
And so, I'm sure a lot of people in the nonprofit world or who kind of watch nonprofit have thought of or heard terms like mission creep or chasing funds. I will chase funds, yes. There's no mission creep. I will chase funds for the express purpose of maintaining a competitive wage for employees and for continuing, sort of high level healthcare at a low cost to the employee. And I say that in all my grant proposals. When I apply for operating support to foundations, I say, look, this is the important thing. The heart of the organization is frontline staff. Getting increasingly competitive. We all know that. Anybody who has heard a news item or read one newspaper in the past several years understands how competitive it is to hire nowadays. I need to keep pace with that, and I would like to offer actually a little bit more, than the midpoint. So, I established a minimum wage here of $20 an hour. So it doesn't matter what your role is, if you're an on-call or what it is that you do, that's the base, that's the start. That's still not very much money. I cite the MIT wage calculator, the living wage calculator in every proposal. I cite it, I provide the link. That shows that in Hennepin County, if you're a single person, you need X dollars per hour. I think it's $19+ per hour. Our local minimum wage doesn't even approach that. And yet a lot of employers are paying that. So that's absurd. If you're in Hennepin County and you have one child, for example, say you're a single mother or single parent, you need Y dollars. If you are a couple with a couple of kids, you need Z dollars. I write that out. I write out those numbers and I say, look, this is what we need. We can't work for less than this. And so I think that has benefited me because it's very consistent. It's a message that people understand. Most people are pretty humane. They want other people to be able to live. And so I think in some ways that has reached some ears that need to hear it. But the other thing that I feel like has happened is we've had pretty decent employee retention. There are a couple of positions that have been tough to fill, but long-term employees haven't lost any. They're employees that precede me and have stuck with it through the very, very lean years, through the COVID years, and are continuing to be here. And I value them so much that I actually get emotional when I think about it. And
Sure.
They're gems, absolute, gifts, gifts to all of us.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And I was curious about retention in particular, and we all know how expensive turnover is. So ultimately, for the health of the organization, retention is a solid goal and strategy for long-term sustainability. We really appreciate the transparency and for you to be tactical too. Like, tell us tactically how you approach this. I think that's really helpful for any other members and organizations that are listening. I want to go ahead and pivot over to Diane because for years she worked extensively with Claudia and the team at AWUM through MACC HR services. Diane, I just want to hear from you, give you the chance to chat about, what you see is, it sounds like an intentional and innovative approach to compensation, or at least, it sounds like Claudia is really on the front edge, front line of finding that sort of competitive compensation strategy in the organization. This must be a workplace culture thing too. Like, what do you hear and see, and what do you take away from your time spent working with Diane and with Claudia? Excuse me.
Yeah, thanks, Laurel. I'd say, what's really stood out to me is the mindset that Claudia has around compensation. I think the work, like she's described, really began many years ago when Claudia recognized that the pay for her staff was extremely low, but it was also really spread out. There wasn't consistency on, advocate pay or certain roles. And I think, as you've heard, for Claudia, it's never been only about wanting to pay a competitive wage. Instead, she has actually referred to it as an investment in personnel. And it is exactly that. And that's the mindset that everyone needs to have with this. I think the mindset around compensation, it needs to go so much deeper than just knowing like what the market's paying. You have to know what your internal equity looks like, but also thinking about it in terms of organizational sustainability, ethics and integrity and attractiveness to employees. And I think Claudia also includes, the specialized work and knowledge that's needed for the roles at AWUM, and has made ongoing investments in her personnel, whether it be through professional development or salaries, bonuses, hazard pay, like she talked about during the pandemic. And I see the return on that investment has been through staff retention, and also that they feel appreciated and acknowledged for their commitment to AWUM and the challenging work that they do every day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think as a case study, AWUM and Claudia's leadership are really set some important groundwork for what organizations can do. And you mentioned internal pay equity, and I know at MACC we've begun the work with our member organizations around just overall pay justice and how important that is, not just for the sustainability and future of our organizations, but for the communities that we serve and our partners, our funding partners in government and philanthropy. They count on us to provide these services, either because they don't provide the services or to supplement services that they offer. So it's really important. It's important that we are transparent and tell this story within our organizations, but also with our partners at mind. And I hear Claudia's example as being really critical for our network. So I'm so glad that we got to hear about that today from Claudia and Diane. I think I just want to wrap us up today with a question for Claudia. As I said, it's been really wonderful to hear your real life example of how you've pursued what really to me seems innovative. Is there something that you would recommend or to other MACC members who might be listening to this podcast today? Do you have any, I guess you could say, words of wisdom for your colleagues in the field? Maybe they're on the path with you, but maybe they're not quite where you're at yet.
Thanks, Laurel. I guess I always like to say, and it's funny to look back and realize that you're like kind of an elder statesperson in the nonprofit world. Kind of flew by. But when I talk to newer managers and newer leaders, I encourage them to really think about what is at the heart of their organization. I mean, of course, it's our participants, our service recipients, our clients, whatever term that we use. But it's really about the people who have the direct connection to those folks every day. And so that's our frontline staff. So keep them in mind. Another thing that I didn't really mention earlier is the importance of being flexible. And I think the term a lot of people use the term family friendly, but I like to broaden that to being flexible about understanding people's real life circumstances and situations, and building a workforce, a team that has at least, I know people don't like sports analogies, but I love the thought of, at least a deep enough bench so that you can bring in a sub now and then to provide respite and relief. I think that actually, more than compensation, at least to me, in the journey that the path that my life has gone, which has, been kind of rocky now and then, having a person who appreciates that you are a full human with a big, complicated life. And so to please be sympathetic to that. So yes, pay equity and competitive wages are very important for people's wellness and people's survival. But having a heart about all of that and really understanding that there are times in our lives where we need to step back a little bit, and we want a fully trained team that's there to kind of carry that weight when the rest of us need that.
That's a beautiful way to wrap up our conversation with that message of humanity and heart. And I just appreciate that so much and appreciate all that you do. It's all the time we have today for the discussion. We could go on, but it has been really interesting, and I appreciate your time and contributions. Great to chat with you, Claudia and Diane. Great to learn from you and to learn from our MACC network. MACC members, you're encouraged to visit this Ask MACC hub on our website. Visit our pages. We've got additional workforce resources, and you'll find a variety of information and links to helpful content, including more in this series of recorded HR interviews with thought leaders. So keep in touch. We're here to support you and our network of MACC members. Thank you. Have a great day and be well. Goodbye.